right. So النبي أولى بالمؤمنين من أنفسهم. So after it, the ayat actually laid out that family system, and also laid out what the structure in how to deal with those ex-slaves, not ex-slaves, but the children that were adopted. And we can't just leave them stranded like that with no family support, with no one to be there for them. So that's why that ayah goes into redefining another definition, not only laying out what it means for the social dynamics of how things work out, but it also included to say, well, there's another very important structure here, is that although, yes, the blood relations are important, but there's a very more important blood, or not blood, but a very important bond that is even superior over the family bond. And that is the bond between the Prophet ﷺ and the believers, between the prophets and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, the spiritual bond. The spiritual bond is on top of all those bonds. Now, what does that mean? Remember how Prophet Nuh alayhi salam, when he goes on the ark, and then he calls on to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, says inna bini min ahli, my son is part of my family. In other words, he wanted to somehow intercede for his son, and that way he won't get punished. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then says, Inni a'idhuka anta inna ibnaka laysa min ahlik. Not inna ibnaka. Innahu laysa min ahlik. Innahu laysa min ahlik. Innahu amalun ghayru salih. That he's not part of your family. Innahu amalun ghayru salih. The action is not pious. Inni a'idhuka an takuna min al-jahilin. I warn you from being one of al-jahilin. What is al-jahilin? Al-jahilin is to look at different structures, including the social structure, from a materialistic perspective, from a materialistic center. When we talk about Jahiliyyah, we're actually talking about different centers. When we look at the system, for example, the financial system, if we're going to base the financial system on our own greed, our own benefit, that is what decides right and wrong, justice, it's okay to get into that transaction or not, then this is called Jahiliyyah, which is why gambling is haram. Why? Because it's based on not making that economical system bring prosperity, but it's based on capitalism. It is based on you actually being the center of considering, I want wealth, and therefore, even if it doesn't bring in the prosperity within the society, I just want wealth and let me do it through a game. Now, this is it, for example, or riba, as one example of Jahiliyyah system in economy or in finance. Jahiliyyah system can also be in the social dynamics, in where you would regard your tribe, or you would regard your own self, you as an individual, or even regarding the system in where, do we necessarily need to have the father there? Why can't we just have the government system take over, taking care of and being there for the children, rather than having, in other words, the custody for the government to pass on to other people, rather than having the biological parents be there for the child. This is one type of Jahiliyyah in the social system. In the systems, we've got so many different systems, whether it's a social system, economical system, we've got political systems, all those different kinds of systems, they can actually be part of Jahiliyyah, and even the way we relate with one another. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, if it's not Jahiliyyah, if it's not a spiritual, based on the spiritual bond, it is therefore a Jahiliyyah bond. Simple as that. If it's not based on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being the center to define the bond and how those dynamics of those different things are played out, then therefore it's a Jahiliyyah system. It's a Jahiliyyah bond. It's a Jahiliyyah center. So here, النَّبِيُّ أَوْلَى بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ مِنْ أَنفُسِهِمْ, telling us that yes, there is the important part, which is how we define the social relations and how we define one another. But there's also one very important bond that is beyond and superior to the bond of defining family. And that is the bond of faith. That is the bond of spirituality. That is the bond that you have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the bond that you have with the Prophet himself. أَوْلَى بِالْمُؤْمِنِينَ مِنْ أَنفُسِهِمْ, meaning that the bond that is between the Prophet ﷺ and the mu'mineen is superior than over their own selves. Even the bond between you and yourself, the spiritual bond, is superior to your own inclinations. Your own inclinations can be those areas to determine lots of things about your behavior. So, a spiritual bond is supposed to be superior even in the way you relate with yourself, in where you would put your spirituality as that lens that determines what behavior, what inclinations, what you do in regards with what your needs and wants, and how you practice those areas. وَأَزْوَاجُهُ أُمَّهَاتُهُم. And in order to lay out the spiritual bond, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala regarded that even the Prophet ﷺ's wives are like mothers to them, in where the mothers of the believers, Ummahat al-Mu'mineen, they were going to be the spiritual connection to later teach the believers, to later teach the Sahaba about Islam, and they would be like mothers to them, where they can't even get married to them because of the sacred position of the Prophet ﷺ. وَأُولُو الْأَرْحَامِ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلَى بِبَعْضٍ فِي كِتَابِ اللَّهِ. Now, emphasizing again on what it wanted to talk about in terms of family structure and family system in Islam, it says وَأُولُو الْأَرْحَامِ, and ulul arham, meaning the family, the relatives in where, and here it actually related it to rahim. Rahim is the womb. Ulul arham is not necessarily talking about the womb, but this is talking about that they go back to the mother. They go back to the system in where is the paternal maternal system. It is the system that is based on family structure. بعضهم أولى ببعض في كتاب الله, that they are the priority to take care of one another, the priority that they will support one another. في كتاب الله. This في كتاب الله would mean that this is decreed in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in inheritance, in the way they support one another in their deen, the way they support one another mentally, they support one another psychologically, they support one another on their family structure, in their ird, they support one another in the financial areas. Fi kitabillah. This is something that was decreed in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have to be there for your brother when he's in need. You have to be there for your sister when she's in need. You can't just back off. Well, she chose to get married to that man. You have to be there to give her the support that she needs. If that husband turns out to be a bad man, you have to be there for your brother. If he happens to be in a dilemma where he lost his job or probably got unemployed or who knows what happened, you have to be there to support his family. You can't just leave him there. He might have gone through, or he or she might have gone through some anxiety, depression, etc. You have to be there to actually call. Are you okay? You need any help? If you hear that they're not able to vocalize it, you have to be there. Travel if you need to, because that is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had actually obliged you to do. This is part of the deen. This is not separate from the deen. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَأُولُو الْأَرْحَامِ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلَى بِبَعْضٍ فِي كِتَابِ اللَّهِ. You can't just assume that, I've forgotten. They decided to make that decision. I warned them that they shouldn't take it, but they still did it. You have to still be there to give them the support. The support whether it's in a device, whether to get them on track to do the right thing, the support in their life and the needs and in the different things that may be the best thing to help them be there and help them succeed in their life and in their akhirah. في كتاب من المؤمنين والمهاجرين. Now, what is the story behind this? This part of the ayah was actually to abrogate a previously decreed legislature that the Prophet ﷺ had decreed before. What is the issue? When the Sahaba migrated from Mecca to Medina, there were a number of Sahaba that basically were left homeless. They didn't have no place to be in, no shelter. They were sleeping in the masajid. They were sleeping in the masjid. They were called Ahl al-Suffa. They had no support in any way. They were left. They were basically left to face the hardship themselves. So the Prophet ﷺ laid out a new structure of family bond. The structure of family bond where one from the Muhajirin and one from the Ansar. The Ansar were the residents of Medina. Were going to be supporting one another as a replacement for the family that they had lost in Medina, in Mecca. So they needed another bond. And that's why the Prophet ﷺ, for example, actually chose one from Medina and one from the Ansar, one from Mecca and one from the Muhajirin, which is from Mecca, and one from the Ansar, from the residents of Medina, or, the people, in order to support one another. So, for example, he made a new brotherhood system in where not only do they support each other financially, but they even support one another even after they die. In other words, they inherit one another. So the Prophet ﷺ actually made Abu Bakr as-Siddiq and Kharija ibn Zayd be the family, the new, family, ukhuwa, where they would inherit one another, they would support one another. Zubayr ibn al-Awwam with Ka'b ibn Malik, Abdul Rahman ibn Auf with Sa'd ibn Rabi', Salman al-Farisi with Abu Darda, Uthman ibn Mad'un with Abu Qatada. So all those, they were these bonds. And of course the names go on and on. It wasn't just limited to those Sahaba. The names actually go on and on in order to build that structure. But then the ayah abrogated that structure and says وَأُولُو الْأَرْحَامِ بَعْضُهُمْ أَوْلَى بِبَعْضٍ فِي كِتَابِ اللَّهِ, where the structure, the bond of family is going to be superior in the situation of inheritance, in the situation of supporting one another financially, من المؤمنين والمهاجرين. Now this is abrogating the previous structure. إلا أن تفعلوا إلى أوليائكم معروفا, unless you wanted to do some kind of a ma'roof. There's always, and this is really important to say, yes, there is one bond. There is one bond, and that bond in where there is the obligatory side of it. There's the obligation, but then there's the other bond in where there's more than the obligation, in where you're doing an extra thing. You're increasing. إلا أن تفعلوا إلى أوليائكم معروفا, unless you want to do more good. In other words, yes, there is a responsibility towards your family, but then you wanted to support your friend. You wanted to support another person that was in need, or you wanted to support probably awliyaikum, the adopted children. You wanted to give them more. Yes, there is a family structure, but there is another good thing that you could do out there. كان ذلك في الكتاب مسطورا. That was determined. في الكتاب, in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala determined those structures, those structures of family, those structures of how we relate with one another, and in Mastura, it was written. What is the importance of it being written? The importance of it is that you cannot change it. This is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had laid out, and you can't change it, but you have to live by it. كان ذلك في الكتاب مسطورا, meaning that there is that structure that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala laid out, and there's your responsibility to live based on it as a constitution, as the reference to go back to. So we're going to end right here, inshallah. There's more to, there's more to come. وَإِذْ أَخَذْنَا مِنَ النَّبِيِّينَ مِيثَاقَهُمْ. We'll continue next week, inshallah. Any questions before we end? I'd be happy to answer any questions. Yeah, if somebody also wants to get unmuted, I can unmute. Just raise your hand or give me any sign, and well, inshallah, unmute. All right, so jazakumullah khairan, everyone, and sorry for being late, and also sorry for being behind in my times, but I think it's really important to relate the ayat with our system today and understand how do we actually look through those ayat and understand our life and understand the systems that we live in today. How are they different and how are they similar? And in order for us not to get indoctrinated without us realizing into a different system and think that this is what things are supposed to look like. Jazakumullah khairan, everyone, and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.